And of course, the concentration has been on these 4 titles: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Did you see the paradox in that? It's right there. It's right there in front of you. Right in front of your eyes. It's easy to pick up. You see the paradox? Listen to it again. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Did you get it that time? Make sure you don't see the 4 titles as 4 distinct things. They actually flow together. They're actually part of a whole. It's not actually the best way to approach them to separate them out, because this is the nature of this child that is born. He is all at once a wonderful counselor, a mighty God. He's an everlasting Father, and he's the Prince of Peace, all wrapped up together in one thing. So, can you see the paradox? You figured it out yet? Trust me, it's right there in front of you, but it can be hard to see. You know, like one of those puzzles? You ever do one of those puzzles where they put the same exact picture up next to each other, and it's got, well, the one on the right has several different things that are different than the one on the left, and you sit there and look at it and say, no, there isn't. And then finally somebody points it out, or the program shows you where the problem is, and you go, oh, yeah, well, I can see that now. That's easy. So let me help you to see it a little easier. It's in the 2nd and the 4th title. It's the conflict between the mighty God and the Prince of Peace. That's the paradox that's in there. That's the difficulty that's in there. And I don't know that you fully understand the problem of that paradox and how difficult it is. And I think I know what the problem is. Johnny did not bring his Hebrew Bible with him today. You see, what you really need to know if you're going to understand the problem is you have to be able to read Hebrew. And of course you all do, right? Absolutely, everybody does. But in the Hebrew, it really gives you a difficult thing to get over, because in the Hebrew, it doesn't just say mighty God. What it says is it uses the Hebrew word gabor. And gabor means a fierce fighting man, a warrior. It's the phrase that's used of David's mighty men. He had the fiercest and the best warriors, the best soldiers, and they were his mighty men. And gabor is the word used for mighty men. And so it has a warrior kind of flair and task to it. And so when Isaiah says he's going to be a mighty God, he's talking about the power of God, the fierceness of God, the warrior-like stance of God, and then he juxtapositions that amazingly to this idea that he's the Prince of Peace. And I'm not sure that Gabor and Shalom, the words for mighty, warrior, and for peace, really go together that well. And that's the paradox. Isaiah prophesies, if you will, that this child, this infant, this newborn, is and will be a warrior God, and at the same time, a Prince of Peace. How can you be Gabor, fierce, mighty, warrior, and be Shalom, peace, and a peacemaker, each at the same time? Now, that's further complicated by the problem that it describes Jesus. And if you go through the life of Jesus, neither one of these phrases seems to fully and adequately describe him in a lot of ways. I mean, after all, if you're going to describe Jesus as a warrior God, it's a little difficult to find the warrior piece in his public ministry. I mean, I know he overturns the tables in the temple, but come on, that's an impulsive, impetuous act, not something that a warrior is going to do. It's not very warrior-like, if you will. And while Jesus lauds the peacemakers in the Sermon on the Mount and says that they will be called sons of God, at other points he says he's going to pit father against son and son against brother and mother against daughter, and that he's going to do this because of his mission and ministry. It doesn't sound very shalom-like, very Prince of Peace kind of stuff. And that totally ignores the fact that right after Jesus is born, within a short time after his birth, all the infants in Bethlehem are murdered by Herod. It doesn't even count the idea that when Jesus announces his public ministry in Nazareth, they try and stone him to death, let alone concentrate on the idea that Jesus ends his life on a cross because of his kind of teaching and work and action. And it's a bloody and terrible scene. Not very Prince of Peace-like, I would say. So which of these titles adequately describes who Jesus is? Which of these titles that Isaiah gives prophesies correctly who this infant will become? Is he a mighty warrior God, or is he a Prince of Peace? And since it's just, us few and the millions joining us on the internet, if we're honest, if we're really honest, we like the Prince of Peace, don't we? We like the Prince of Peace because it sounds comforting to us. But we're a little apprehensive about the mighty God idea because that sounds intimidating. The other disquieting truth about Jesus is that he is far more militant than we give him credit for. And he's a much more divisive figure than we seem to glean from our cursory reading of the Gospels. Jesus gets himself into a lot of trouble, and he's obstinate, and he's direct, and at times he seems insensitive and just saying things like it is. He lives in a land that is ruled by the law, and yet he constantly defies it. He lives in a land that's ruled by a certain code about the Sabbath, and yet he doesn't observe it. He lives in a land where the spiritual leaders, where the people that are the formation folks, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, are constantly in conflict with him and he with them. He challenges them, he berates them, he calls them names at points. And they are so frustrated by him and so angry at him that not only do they plot to kill him, they succeed in a plot to kill him, and they do so by bribing one of his inner circle to give him the coordinates so that they can arrest him and turn him over eventually to the Romans to be crucified. This is not the nice, sweet little Jesus that we seem to think about when we talk about him out of the Gospels. Jesus destroys his own popular movement at the height of its popularity. The height of the popularity of Jesus comes at the feeding of the 5,000. 5,000 people are ministered to out in the wilderness in this marvelous experience where Jesus both teaches them and provides food for them. 5,000 people, and most scholars say, because the text says 5,000 men, It doesn't count the women and children, and obviously there were some children there because the boy gave the lunch. So they think the crowd could be as much as 10,000. 10,000 people out in the wilderness, away from the Sea of Galilee, gathered together just to hear this preacher, this prophet, this philosopher, this truth giver, is a huge, huge crowd. Jesus will never be more popular during his lifetime than he is at the feeding of the 5,000 when these thousands and thousands of people come. And the next day they follow him, who wouldn't, and they come upon him, and Jesus looks at them with disdain. And he says, the only reason you're following me is that you want another meal. And they say, well, yeah. And then Jesus says this to them. Get this one. He says this to them. If you won't eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part of me. Now that's the way to engender a good crowd, isn't it? And surely, 1 by 1, 10 by 10, 100 by 100, these thousands that have made up his adoring fans leave and say, I won't follow that guy. There's something wrong with him. Even his mother and his brothers at one point try and take Jesus away from this. They come and let him know that they're outside, and their plan is to get him out of there and to, they want to commit him. They think he's crazy. They think he's just lost it. And Jesus refuses to go with them and looks at the crowd and says that he disowned his own family. He said, those of you that do the will of God, you're my brothers and sisters. How do I reconcile? How do I reconcile this idea that Jesus is the Prince of Peace when so much of his life is all about turmoil and struggle and difficulty, and more often than not, pain and anguish? How do I reconcile this paradoxical prophecy with the living paradox about Jesus himself? See, we have difficulty with that because we have two different views of God, and we believe that this is the accurate portrayal. There's a God of the Old Testament, and then there's the God of the New Testament, and they're not really the same God, because the God of the Old Testament is really harsh, and we talk about the Old Testament as this harsh and vengeful portrayal of God. I mean, after all, he does the flood, and he destroys all of humanity and everything in it except what's on the ark. He sends the plagues to Egypt, one after another, 10 in total. The last one, and we kind of gloss over this, the last one kills infants, firstborn, children, in all the houses of Egypt. That's pretty harsh, don't you think? And then we don't like to talk about the Red Sea. No, we do like to talk about the Red Sea. We love to talk about the Red Sea. We end the story of the Red Sea with the sea parting and the nation of Israel going on through on dry land. And we forget the rest of the story, which is after they got through on dry land, Moses puts his arm down, the Red Sea comes down, and guess who's in the middle of the Red Sea and gets drowned? All the Egyptian army. He's a vengeful God in the Old Testament. Think about Korah's rebellion. Who? Well, Korah was a good Jew. He was related to Moses. But he said he got tired of Moses' leadership. He got tired of what God was seemingly telling Moses, and he didn't believe it. And so he said, let's overthrow Moses and we'll do our own thing. And what God does is he said, set apart Korah and his family and his followers, and they do. And Korah and all of his followers are over there in one section, and the Lord sends an earthquake. The earth opens up, and all of them are sucked down into the ground and die. Isn't that an interesting picture of God? Then there's the exile, where he has these Babylonians come in and destroy his own temple and destroy the city that is his own. And for a generation, the nation of Israel is in exile. It's a different portrait of God, isn't it? Because in the New Testament, don't we have this wonderful picture of Jesus who's sweet and kind, who's meek and mild, who's loving and forgiving. And we think that somehow between the end of the old and the beginning of the new, God changed. And yet we are fond, so very fond of quoting the fact that God never changes. But we think he changed from the Old to the New Testament. Let me guarantee you that God is the same in the Old as he is in the New. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. That indeed is true. The reality is that God didn't change and doesn't change. And the God of the Old Testament was far more merciful than we give him credit for. And Jesus in the New Testament is a whole lot tougher than we imagine. Let's talk about the reality of who God is. Because what the prophecy in Isaiah does is force us to deal with the reality of the full nature of who God is and the full nature of who Jesus is. See, I think that the key to resolving Isaiah 9:6 is understanding that it isn't a paradox at all. What Isaiah prophesies is that the nature of God holds these two things, this mighty warrior God and this Prince of Peace, that the nature of Jesus holds these two things in perfect tension. In a way that you and I cannot. We'd love to. We'd love to be able to know when to get mad and when not to. We'd love to know when to be able to just say, oh, how sweet you are, and when to say, you gotta be kidding me. We'd love to be able to know when to honk at somebody when they're driving stupid on I-4 or 75 or 275, and when to just smile and say, God bless you. It's one of the reasons I don't put religious bumper stickers on my car. I don't want them to know who I am when I look at them. Our problem with mighty God is that we have a tendency to focus on Gabor, on the idea of mighty, the warrior part. And we think that that's what we ought to concentrate on because that's the identifier about who God is, the mighty part. When Isaiah wants us to focus not on that, but he wants us to focus on the other part of the phrase. It's not that he's a mighty God, it's that he's a mighty God. This is who this baby is. And this is the revelation. This is the amazing miracle. This is the stark truth of what Isaiah says, that the baby born will be God. Not when he grows up, not when he gets to be 30 or 33, not when he starts doing his miracles or his teaching, but in the very manger in which Jesus is born, Jesus is God. It's the Elohim part. That's the Hebrew word for God that Isaiah is really focusing on. It's the linchpin of the whole phrase. Comes right in the middle. And wonderful counselor and mighty, hold on to this idea that it is God who is wonderful counselor and mighty, just as he is everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. God is able to hold it together in a kind of wonderful tension. And he is able to perfectly distribute his might and power, while at the same time giving us his peace and love. Only Jesus can hold this together. You and I, not so much. I've been married to Joni for 45 years. And we still struggle with the idea of when we should argue and when we should just forgive. When we should point something out and when we should let it go. Come on, folks, that'd have been a good amen. I know there are people. Amen. We go to war with others when we shouldn't. And we don't hold people accountable when they must be. We don't know how to navigate these two aspects of both divine nature and human behavior. The strength and power of God. This is the secret. The strength and power of God resides in his very nature. It resides in the fact that he is God. What Isaiah emphasizes is not the baby's humanity. He emphasizes this infant's divinity. He's fully God in Isaiah's mind. Even though as a baby, he must be fully human. Jesus is not powerful because he has discovered or obtained the secret of peace or of power. Jesus is powerful because he is power. He's mighty because he is might. Not because he inherited some strength, not because he found the secret to something. It is his very nature because he is God, and in the very nature of God is this tension between might and power and peace and joy and love. I desperately need to know this when I face things that are stronger than I am. I'm in my late 60s. Doyle says I'm a youngster, and I agree until I feel what I feel. And then I don't feel so young. And I'm facing things I can't control. I'm facing aspects of my life and of my body and of my living that I'm not going to be able to overcome just by saying, nah, I can do that. I have to face things that are stronger than I am. I face temptations that are greater than my will and resolve to deny. I'm facing a virus, as we all are, that none of us can control, and that no one seems to be able to fully get their hands on. They skipped Christmas Day, the state did, in reporting in Florida about virus cases. They reported yesterday there were 17,000 cases in Florida. I can't stop that. I can't prevent it. I can wear a mask, I should, I do. I socially distance as you are today. I do the right things, but I can't control this. It's greater than I am. A little thing. I can't even see it. It's bigger than you and me. Alcohol, drugs, sex, greed, power, revenge. The temptation to do these things, or the myriad of sins that plague us as human beings, reminds us again and again, I don't have the power to resist and to overcome on my own solely. What do I need? Oh man, I need a warrior God. I need a mighty God. I need a strong God that can allow me to go to battle with these temptations and have his strength and power overcome what I cannot. I need to know that he's a mighty God for my everyday living. And when I fall, and when I sin, and when I fail to live out the reality of what it is that I say I believe and say who I am, I desperately need a God who forgives. I desperately need a God who not only grants forgiveness, but provides for pardon, grace, gives me hope, and floods me with, yes, peace. There are times in my life that I need the mighty God And there are times in my life that I need the Prince of Peace. And most of all, what I need is a God who knows when I need which of those. Because if left up to me, I'll inevitably choose the wrong one at the wrong time. He's able to hold this together in perfect tension. And while I am powerless, I need the God who is strength, who is grace, who is might, and who is peace. Paul tried to say this in a way we could all understand. He talked about his own weakness in the flesh, his inability to overcome what was in him physically. And then he gave up. He said, Lord, I can't do this. I have no ability to overcome what's in my flesh. And it was then and only then that Paul learned the greatest of lessons. And that is that when I am weak, then I am strong. Because God's power is made perfect in my weakness. He comes in and he is the mighty God or the Prince of Peace, whatever is necessary to overcome the situation. So I charge you today to revel in the mighty God. This Christmas message is for all of you because you should revel in the fact that he is the Prince of Peace, that you should revel in this paradox, in this tension, and you should do it with all of your life and with all of your understanding, with all of your heart, mind, and soul. You should do it when you forgive those who have sinned against you. That takes both a mighty God and the Prince of Peace acting in you. Because when somebody sins against you, you just want the mighty God to bring havoc down upon them. But he gives you the Prince of Peace so that you'll know how to forgive. This is imperative when you give up your need to be right in order to serve, in order to love, in order to care. It's what we do when we gather together and wash each other's feet. I know we can't do that right now, but boy, that's something we ought to do more frequently than once a year, to remind us what our role is and who we are to one another. It ought to come up when you mow a neighbor's yard just because you want to give a witness. When you offer a cup of cool water, when you babysit for a single mother who hasn't been able to get away from her children for all these months because their kids are there all the time. She has to teach them, feed them, bathe them, discipline them, and never gets a break. It ought to come up when you defend the defenseless, when you stand up against injustice, when you cry out for racial reconciliation in a time when there is such incredible racial tension, when you give sacrificially to the Lord and say, Lord, I don't know where all this is going to come from, but I'm going to be a giver and not just a taker. I'm going to trust you with all that I have, including everything I've got in my pockets. Now, you see, we need to live this out and to depend on God for him to be both mighty and peacemaking in our lives. For only he knows when we need each one.
Thank you for being part of our online family. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you get notifications for any future videos or content. And feel free to please share with a friend. You can also follow us on Facebook or Instagram. And if you feel so inclined and would like to donate and support our ministry, please click the donate button found in the description. Thank you, and God bless you.